working with explosives in the mine then?
Yeah, he was a driller.
He was a driller.
Explosives.
Yeah. But he, like I say, he worked 36
He
mines.
had pock marks all on his face, black marks, if you remember, where that
Backfired on
it
him.
backfired on him. And
Got hit with the coal.
He got hit with the coal.
Exploded it.
And
Also, in southern Illinois, when my mother was pregnant with Josephine, or Bob, I forget which one, I think it was you. And my dad come home from work, and he told my mother to fix a bucket for him. He was going to work an extra shift that night. They needed some people for extra work. We went right back down to mine, and about 4 hours after he was down there, the big explosion. And you know, it was a little mining camp, and everybody ran to the mine, and they were screaming and hollering. My mother ran all the way down there, and she was pregnant, and we were all waiting at the shaft, and nothing was happening. Then they started bringing some bodies up, and injured people. I think 4 or 6 of them got killed that night. Or 16, I forget what it was. And some got hurt. And he worked that whole shift. He was on another side of the mine, never knew nothing happened. So my mother had to worry until everybody was out, and finally he come up. He didn't even know anything happened until he hit the bottom. At that time they didn't have all these motors and all that, and he walked to work underneath these mules and that. And so he didn't even know there was an explosion, but they had a unit working, mining, and he was doing what they call dead work, cleaning up him and another guy. They never even heard nothing. It was a dust explosion. I forget how many, we even had some clippings of that, how many got killed.
Yeah, I remember Mom talking about that, how worried she was.
Yeah, she was really worried because he wasn't coming out, you know. They were bringing up all these other miners from that run because they started bringing them up about 8 o'clock, and he didn't come out until about 11.
And when they got married, they had one of the biggest snowstorms they've ever had.
Is that right?
Uh-huh. I don't know how many feet of snow they had.
When did they get married? Do you remember their anniversary?
February the 15th.
February?
February the 5th was their anniversary. Yeah, 1960.
15.
15.
Yeah.
Well, then when he came to Banal, he became a member of the Prosperity Club, Secretary Treasurer, Italian Lodge. He was, I guess,
some kind of officer.
Officer who kept the books of the Banal Cooperative. He was Secretary Treasurer. And he was interested in joining. He belonged to the Moose, Eagles. And besides the Italian Society, Prosperity Club. And during the bootlegging days, he used to help bartend. He used to help Lito bartend once in a while.
He was a good bartender because
he had experience bartending. And the Prosperity Club was a speakeasy during bootlegging days, and a good friend of his was Lito.
Lito who?
I forget his last name now. Italian.
First name was Lito.
And I could remember him coming to the house and getting wine from my dad to sell at the club. You know.
And now he's known as the wine capital of Illinois.
Yeah.
In a journal they had written in that journal that they must have the biggest jelly factory in the country in Banal because
all the grapes coming in.
The grapes used to come in by trainload.
By trainloads from California.
When was this?
This was all through,
all through our early years.
All through our early years until grapes got so high you couldn't buy them no more.
Yeah.
Well, that was grapes got high after Prohibition, not before.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm saying, Paul made wine until in the 50s.
I know.
In the 50s.
Late 50s.
Late 50s. Yeah. And they used to buy average anywhere from a half a ton to a ton. My dad always bought a ton. But the woman I worked for, delivered milk for, They bought 2 tons of wine.
You have to cut the paper.
Okay, cut her off then. I want to bring a story in that happened in 1946, right after the war. I was home one evening and a fellow with an old Chevrolet, looked like about a 1933 Chevrolet or 32 Chevrolet coupe, with a woman in there. And he asked me if Charlie Garino lived there, and I said, yeah, and he said, is he home? And I told him he was at the club. So he went over to the club and he brought him back. And then we went to sit down at the kitchen table and they were drinking wine. And this was the fella, it was 40 years later, that he was supposed to see when he came to this country.
From Pennsylvania.
From that small mining camp in Pennsylvania, and he told my dad that that mine had went broke and that town, you know, disintegrated. He left, and he was married to this woman, which was his second wife. And this woman, my dad recognized her right away. He used to board with this woman in Nevada, so he knew his wife. And so they talking about old times and all that. And this fella had gone back to Italy. He was 10 years older than my dad, so he was 70. My dad was 60 at the time. He'd gone back and he'd met John, my dad's older brother, and he told him about, you know, my dad came to this country to see him and never did find him. So he looked up my dad. They were making a trip by car across country. And,
what a coincidence.
Yeah. 40 years later, he met the guy. And they had a good conversation, talked about old times and that, and where, you know, the way he went and all that. So.
Then my dad told me to go back when he worked with his brother John and his Alsace-Lorraine mine. They were owned by the Germans. And one of his bosses was a German. And he walked around with a swagger stick, and nobody liked him. You know, he was a slave driver and everything else. And one day, my dad told me they caught this guy by himself, and they tied him to a mine prop, and then they knocked all the props away, and the whole damn thing caved in on this mine, and they left him there. He's probably still there now. Yeah, he said nobody ever came looking for him either. So that was another story my dad told me.
So anyhow, when they came to Banal, well, first they rented a house, 2 rooms with tobacco. Remember that? Not tobacco.
Chalero.
No, with
Bracco?
Bracco. They had 2 rooms for a while, and then they rented a house on 8th Street, just right down from where we live, on the corner. And they rented that house, which belonged to my uncle. And not my uncle, my dad, my mother's cousin.
Yeah.
And
One of the Leones.
right, Jim Leone
Jim
owned it.
Leone.
And that's where Joe and I were born, in that house there. And when I was 1 year old, they bought that 5 acres of land
And built a house.
and built a house on it. And
So you were born in what year?
I was born in 1922.
So in 23 they built the house.
Right.
Okay.
And they did it all on borrowed money. They borrowed money from
Relatives.
Uncle Pete, cousin Pete
Leone.
Leone, and from
Jim Leone.
Jim Leone helped him buy the land, and his 2 brothers helped. And he didn't borrow nothing from the bank. He just borrowed money from like that and built the place.
So he built from Uncle John and Uncle Joe Garino.
Right. In other words, they were working down Southern Illinois now, and they him because with money, and Pete Leone helped him quite a bit.
Yeah, Mom said they owned Pete Leone 2,000 or 3,000 they had to pay.
Yeah. So anyhow, this was during the hand loading days, and the harder you worked and the more you worked, the more money you worked. So my dad worked a lot of overtime. And by the Depression, from 23 to 29, when the Depression, he already had the house and the land paid for.
Sheesh.
It was all paid off already.
Not only that, then he got he sent for the money from Italy, and he bought the other farm.
That was in 1934. That was,
Yeah, that was the height of the Depression.
yeah.
So he bought that 115 acre.
While he was working all these mines and traveling, he always sent his money back to Italy. And at that time, they would put it in the post office like they used to do here years ago. And they'd get a little interest on it. Well, in 1934, during the hard Depression, his mother died, which was the last one on his side. So he decided to get his money.
Just in time,
Just
too.
in time, because the lira still had its full value at that time. It was worth better than a nickel. You know, it was, I think, 20 liras to the dollar it was.
Something like that. Yeah.
And now you get about 600 something for a penny. So it would still have the full value, and he got that money. And then it was my mother's idea to invest it in land, because at that time Bob was still in high school and figured maybe we'd all end up on a farm, but which none of us did. So they bought that farm
By Bunker Hill.
Yeah, I know where it is.
And my mother was
Dorchester.
And that
Actually, Dorchester.
yeah, near
Now,
there.
does Bobby and Terry know where that farm's located?
Yeah, I've taken it back.
Okay.
But it was actually, my mom was the one that instigated buying that farm.
You bought it for a song.
This guy from Gillespie, I forget. Freese was the real estate man that we were dealing with. And he had taken Mom and Pop, and me and Joe went along to farms that were isolated back. You had to go down dirt roads, you know, they were empty. And this farm had people living in there.
And we're right on the highway.
Right on the highway. And he took us there, but he said the farm was sold already in Turcoletti. Not Turcoletti, the one that had the post office. Was that Turcoletti?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what
Well,
the-
he had bought a half of it with somebody else. And my mom liked that farm because it was right on the highway and easy to get to, and it was much better than anything we'd seen. So she went down to Turcoletti and told him, says, because we had looked at a farm that was right behind that. And she told Mr. Turcoletti, she said, we're going to be neighbors. And he said, what do you mean we're going to be neighbors? He says, well, we're buying that farm right behind you. And he said, you are? He said, yeah. He said, but we want the one you got because we got kids, and he didn't have no kids that were, at that time, that were interested. He said, we got kids and we want to move on that farm. And he said, well, being that you're honest, he said, if you want it, you can have it. So we bought that one there. It was,
Just switched farms then.
right, we never did buy that. That's just a story my mother told so we could get that farm. We did look at a farm right behind there, but you had to go through a dirt road to get to it. And so he agreed to let us have it, and we bought it. And actually, when we bought it, the guy says, you won't have this no time at all. I'll buy it back from you if you want me to. He came back within 6 months and offered my dad $1,000 more, and my dad wouldn't sell it back to him.
But you never did go on the farm.
No, we never did.
Why not?
That was his.
Well, the first one that had the chance, when Bob got out of school, I remember my dad saying that if we go out on a farm, he said, I'll switch to number 4. Bob wanted to work on a farm, but he didn't want to work on a farm. So he ended up in Chicago at the time, remember? So things were stood as they were while we kept that rented. Then when I got to graduate, I was milking 5 cows. And he asked me, he says, if you want to go on that farm, he says, and the war had started already. It hadn't started yet, but the Europe was all in. He said, if you want to go on that farm, he said, I'll give you those 5 cows and I'll buy you some more and I'll help you buy machinery if you want to run the farm. Because I was a little more interested in helping him on stuff like that. And at that time I already decided I had milked enough cows.
You smell like a cow already, huh?
I decided that wasn't for me, because you figure I was home by myself. I was milking 10 cows a day, 365 days a year. That's 3,600 cows a year.
Besides the chickens.
And besides hauling the manure and the chickens and feeding them and all that stuff, I had enough, you know. So I gave it up.
But that was a good investment. The farm paid off, especially during the war years. They made more in 1 year than they paid for the whole farm.
Yeah, it turned out to be a good investment.
Yeah. So then, anyhow, that's where
But I didn't want to sell it. I remember going to Frank Bertetti, and he told me you shouldn't sell that farm. Everybody's buying land.
Yeah, but Pa said, Pa realized that his health was not good.
Yeah.
And he said Ma could never handle it, all that, you know,
Well,
the business and everything. He wanted to, there's two things that he did. One was sell the farm, and one was to put in a furnace.
yeah.
Because he figured Ma couldn't go ahead and bank the fires down there and haul coal in it and everything.
Well,
And he said, he told me, he says, I'm going to fix it for Ma so she won't have it easy.
well, anyhow, getting back to that farm, the reason he sold the farm was the fella that was working there one morning he went to milk, and he had a heart attack and died. And
I was home then.
Yeah, he died, and he had two sons, but they were off the farm already, and the daughter was married. They were all married.
That was in 58, wasn't it?
Oh,
59,
it was
60?
in the 60s already.
60s?
It was about 2 years before my dad died. It was probably 62
63.
or 3. So the son took the mother out of the farm because she couldn't stay there by herself. And then he came over to the house and he offered my dad $24,000 for the farm. And my dad didn't want it anymore. He didn't want to leave that thing empty. And so he never asked it. He come to me and he told me, he said, if you want the farm, because my mom always said, if you want the farm, you could have it, you know, because I was always taking my dad to the farm. So he offered it to me for 24. Well, when I went home and told Gloria, she cried and everything else, and she didn't want to live on a farm, and Jesus, she about went into hysterics. So I said, well, that's all. That's no farm then. And so I told my dad, sell it for whatever you can get. So just a few weeks later, a fellow from Bunker Hill, the one that lives there now, came over and he offered my dad $28 for it. So he was going to sell it, but Vertigo come over and said he could get more for it. And so he put it on the market, and he never could get more than that. So finally, this fellow bought it for 28, but he had to pay Vertigo extra money for. It cost him another about $600-700 for Vertigo. He just took it, which he did no work at all. So that was the end of the farm years. But I made a lot of trips there.
I made some too. You take Pa. I was driving it. No, I take Pa. I can remember him grabbing them rats, the great big rats, by the neck and squeezing them and killing them. I don't know how he could even catch them. They'd be in them grain bins.
We're out there in Bunker Hill or by
Yeah.
Dorchester there?
Yeah. He'd go in there and he'd grab it with one hand and he'd wring their necks and throw it on the floor.
When we used to go there, this fella had 2 rat dogs, you know, little terriers, and we'd get them, you know, and put them in a. You ought to see those things catch rats as we were shoveling the corn, you know. And boy, they'd grab them, kill them, throw them aside. And they'd catch a lot of rats while we were in there working.
I've never seen that before.
Oh yeah, these little rat terriers would really catch them.
Huh. Oh.
Well, my mother's name was Domenica Leone before she was married, and related to all the Leones in Banal. And she had a sister, Mariana, married to my father's brother, Lawrence. And my mother had a brother that was in South America by Raphael. They used to correspond, and he had a aviary, didn't he? A bee.
Yeah.
He was raising bees for honey, you know. I guess sell the honey. And the last we heard, one of his sons was killed by the Peronistas, Peron, when in Argentina. And I think he passed away when he was, I know he was 80-something years old, and he was never to this country, but originally there was 3 brothers of my mother's in Argentina. One stayed there, Raphael, and Barbajim, our uncle James, came to
Kevy's dad.
Kevy's dad came to Benal, and the other one went to Italy. I forget
And he
it.
came to this country when Louis was here.
Yeah.
And he was in St. Louis for quite a while, then he chose to go back to Italy.
That was Dominic.
Dominic.
Yeah, well, that isn't the one that was in South America.
Another brother.
Another brother that was in South America. Both my dad's family and my mother's family had 11 in a family. It was 11 brothers and sisters.
Gee.
And my mom was born in 1887 in Mastre, a small town in Italy, not too far from Turin. And where my dad was born in Laini, which was a suburb of Turin. And, like I say, she came across in 1914 during the World War I, when the German submarines were sinking all those boats. They took the southern route. She always said they were on alert all the time. They didn't know if they were going to make it or not. But they did make it to New York.
So she went through Ellis Island too.
She went through Ellis Island too.
Did she come by herself?
Her and her sister.
Mariana.
Yeah.
Emma's mother.
Right, I know.
They came
Do
here.
you just have any of the papers? Any of the immigration papers at all?
No. Not that I know of.
No,
I don't know.
I don't have any either. I did have my dad's citizen's paper from when he got in Ely, Nevada. But Gloria misplaced him. She blames me, but I know where I had him, and I can't find him no more. It was in 1908 when he. If you ever go through Ely, go to the courthouse there and you get the records.
I was into that North Hotel where you
You know,
was.
you could ride in to the county seat there and get them.
I did write into when to some address when they were doing this. What do you call that? Where the monument on Ellis Island?
Yeah, Monument to Ellis Island.
Yeah, Statue of Liberty. They were going to print a book there with everybody's name that came through there and have a little bit about him. And I wrote in. Bruno wrote in, and he got a copy of what his dad, when he come over, how much money he had and all that. But by the time I sent in, I never got an answer. They quit sending them out. I wanted to see what he, they would tell you when he came and what boat and everything, but I never did get an answer.
I'm going to pause a second. Say that again.
This is, my dad came through Ellis Island in 1906, and my mother came through Ellis Island in 1914.
Okay, and then she came through with her sister, Mariana.
She came through with her sister Mariana, yeah.
And we have relatives in Colorado too.
Leones.
The Leones related on my mother's side.
In Trinidad.
Trinidad, Colorado, and they're in construction. And one of them's a multimillionaire. He does all the highway construction for Colorado highway system. And has a yacht and everything. And Terry went through there
Just recently.
and visited with these people,
Well,
with these relatives.
There's two families there. He visited with the family that has the sand and gravel and cement.
Cement trucks.
And stuff.
And his uncle owns all the heavy construction. Some of the machines cost $300,000-$400,000 each. Yes.
Well, I was going to say, go ahead and turn it off while we're inside now. We're going to talk. Well, all right, I'm sorry.
Grew up on a 5-acre farm then.
Yeah, we grew up on a 5-acre farm. We always had, started off with 2 cows, and then we worked it all the way up to 5 cows. We always had at least 100 laying chickens, plus spring chickens every year. And
Once in a while a hog.
my mother always said that we had to learn to work if we were going to make a living. So each one of us had to learn to milk and deliver milk, clean the house, and we all
clean the chicken coop.
had all our chores to do, bring in coal, and everybody had a chore to do. And you did your chores and you went to school.
And we walked.
And everybody walked to school, and all the boys wore overalls at that time. And that's all you, how we grew up. And summertime we had to make hay.
And we turned it by hand.
Turn it by hand, and also rake behind the big rake, so we got every stick of grass. and my dad, he worked in the mine when the mine worked. If he didn't, he worked around the yard. But almost every night he had to go to the club. He went to every night after supper and played cards and came home around 10:30, went to work the next day. Sunday, he left the morning about 10 o'clock and went to play cards, and he had to have his meal around the table at 12 so he could eat right away and get right back to, so he could get a seat in the card game for the afternoon. And he really loved to play.
Played Tarok, an Italian game.
They played Tarok, they played other games.
Pinochle and Tarok.
Yeah, he played for chips, for beers, but he really loved to play cards. And almost all our youth, you never seen him except in the daytime, because every night he was gone and he'd come back. You know, you'd be in bed by time until we got older, but he never hung around the house. He was gone every night.
But he'd be back before 10. He'd be 9:30.
I had the coldest bedroom in the house, and it used to get really cold.
Yeah.
And
when
when he used to come home from the club, I used to stay awake and lay awake in bed. He'd cover me with that coat that was Barbara Joe's coat when he was in the war, and it was an all-wool coat. And then he'd bend over and he'd kiss me. It's the only kisses I got in my whole life from either of my parents was from my dad, and he'd kiss me every night before I went to bed and cover me with that coat, and then I'd go to sleep.
In them days, the houses were cold, and we'd have to get around a heating stove with our underwear on and heat them up and then dive in bed.
Right.
So that, because the bed was so cold, and when real cold nights you couldn't turn because we had all the coats in the house on top of the bed, besides the covers.
Right.
To keep warm. And the bedrooms were always shut off from the heater because the house
couldn't heat it all.
And,
did each of you have a bedroom then?
no, when we were younger, us three boys slept together.
Yeah.
And I slept in there too.
Not in with us. You had a little, in the same bedroom, but you had your separate bed.
Yeah.
We all slept in one bedroom until she got a little older, and then she got her own bedroom, which was the meat locker before that.
Before that,
flour.
Flour too.
They used to buy a ton of flour to make bread, and it was stored in that back bedroom.
And you kept that in there all year?
Well, until it was gone, then we'd buy another ton.
My mother used to break bread.
Every day.
Not every day, twice a week at least.
Oh no,
3
she
times
makes
a
it
week.
almost every day.
But 3 times a week she made bread, every other day.
And Pa would buy a ton of flour, and they'd store it in that back bedroom.
So all us kids grew up, we all had chores, every one of us. Except for Joe, he'd always try to sneak away and so he'd get out of working.
Yeah.
Let me and Bob clean the barn and do all the work.
But
And Joe would crawl through the grass, through the hay, and we'd holler at him, and he'd duck, he'd squat down. And then as soon as that, then he'd get up and run like heck, and we'd holler again, he'd lay down. Finally, he'd get way out there, and he'd be playing ball by the East Side School there, you know.
And Joe used to always sneak off with all those good clothes.
Yeah.
And all those get Ma. Joe's got my good pants, or Joe's got my shoes.
Yeah.
How old were you then?
Oh.
Well, in grade school, when we was going to grade school. And we weren't fortunate to have it. Finally, when I got into 6th grade, we got our first bicycle. It was half mine and half Joe's.
And I rode it too.
Yeah, and everybody else rode it. Including my dad once in a while. But Joe and I fought many times over that bike. When it was my turn to ride it, he wanted it, and we used to fight. Yeah, we used to fight over it.
And remember Greenwood Park?
Yeah.
You ask anybody today where Greenwood Park is, they don't know.
Yeah.
That was it was an open field.
Open field where all
Right across from Barudi's.
Diamond baseball.
It was a baseball diamond. There used to be ball games there all the time, and the kids and we'd go to the games, and young kids would play.
In them days, we didn't have little leagues. You'd form just a little independent team, and we'd go down, maybe play a game at Sourville in the morning, and then in the afternoon we'd play at number 1, then we'd go swimming.
Where did you swim?
We swam at number 1 pond most of the time. When we were kids, we swam at the creek. The creek was real nice at that time.
In relation to what, behind the house or where? Which
Well,
direction from the house?
East of
Okay.
Leone's
Leone's
field.
there was a swimming hole there that was, part of it was over your head.
You
It was
know,
around a bend.
remember when Joe almost drowned?